never happened to me before. Never, ever, ever. Thank you. I don't think I've ever had an entrance quite like that.
Welcome to India.
Thank you. Something I will always remember.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being amongst us. There are a large number of people here. Everyone who's here has something to do with young companies, with startups, and we're very excited that we have somebody like you here. Many of them are aspiring people. Many of them are very successful CEOs as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, Eric, we're going to, you're very busy. We're going to use this time. My questions are going to be short. Your answers can be as long, right, as you want them to be. We always wonder, somebody like you who had a very successful career, you were at your peak of your career.
By the way, it's not over yet.
No.
I intend to come back to India.
And so what made you, at that stage, join a startup which was unlisted, founded by college dropouts? And as you did this, what was the most challenging and most exciting part of the transition that you went through?
Well, as you know, because we met when I was at Novell, I had been running Novell for a while, but I wanted to work in a company that was nearer my home, full of very smart people. And I met Larry and Sergey, who I thought were precociously brilliant, and I just thought that it would be fun to work with them. So that's literally why I joined Google. And the rest is all luck, literally. So don't discount the value of luck, but I would encourage you to find the smartest person possible and work with them. I'm sure that there's a person smarter than you. Larry and Sergey are certainly smarter than I am. And so the partnership worked out very, very well.
So was it challenging making the shift from large company to a small startup? And was the adjustment a difficult one?
Yes. I had had a large office, lots of staff, a big salary, all those sorts of things. When I joined at Google, I had a corner desk in a room with 5 other people, but I got to know them very well. So think of it that way. One day, one of the engineers, who I might mention is Indian, decided to join me in my office because he said it wasn't used enough. And he and I became best friends. So you have to sort of go with the flow.
A number of startups get created, and I'm sure there are many right here. But we've always seen a lot of them succeed, but very few really scale.
Yeah.
So as you got into Google at a time when it was still small, what did you have to do to scale it up? Were there any specific things that you do? And reflecting back over this period that you've been there, are there any things that you won't do it again?
Well, we certainly were not perfect, and we certainly made mistakes. But overall, I think the success speaks for itself. The most important thing when you think about a startup is don't accept a limited view of what you're going to do. You're much better off in a startup deciding to change the world, and that what you're currently doing is just a part of that. And if you do it that way, you will attract a higher quality engineer, a higher quality scientist, a better salesperson, and you'll have a better message. So if you anticipate that this kind of success, you'll build systems that are more likely to scale. There are so many examples of startups where they build a very nice demo, and it showcases very well. They get funding, and then as they start to get users, it begins to break. And it begins to break because it wasn't well enough thought about, or it just wasn't architected for millions of users or billions of users. And that's where having the right technical people matters a lot. Many of the startups that we see being founded today are going to fail, not because the business is not a good idea, because it is, but because they'll fall off, or they'll be easily attacked, or all of a sudden they'll get a surge of use, and then they'll break, and then nobody comes back, because it's brutal out there.
So, Eric, during this journey that you had in the last several years, did you envision, were you able to see people talk about we should all have a vision and the like? Did you envision that you would be where you are today?
Well, I certainly did not. And as I said, luck is a big component. I've learned a number of things which I will share. One is that the world is a much bigger place than you think it is. Even India is a bigger place than I thought it was. And I think that the complexity and the diversity of human thought globally is what drives us all. And most people underestimate the opportunity for what they're working on. Mobile payments, authentic identity, a high quality video distribution, all of the sort of mobile, local kinds of solutions that people are doing today, they're undershooting the possibility. So when Larry and Sergey founded the company, they focused on all the world's information. Now, if you'd asked me, I would have said, well, we'll just do the web. But they said all the world's information, comma, which includes what's on the web so far. And that's a good example of this point.
Yeah, you mentioned about India, and I hope we can see you more often here.
Yes.
But from your perspective, as you see it, and I think Google has been for years here and fairly successful, what are the interesting opportunities and challenges that, from your perspective, sitting as an executive chairman, you would see India has?
Well, let me tell a good and bad story on India's side. India, of course, dominated the BPO outsourcing market very successfully for many, many years. Really defined that category, defined it globally. India today is not a leader in web services and web programming, even though it has an opportunity to do so. I wonder why not. And my guess is that the simplest answer is that the internet, and in particular connectivity, has lagged. So on the other hand, that creates an opportunity. Some numbers are 20 million broadband connections, plus or minus 130 million internet users, plus or minus a population of 1.3 billion. So roughly speaking, 10% penetration. So imagine what will happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years when another 600 million Indians, 800 million Indians join the conversation, start programming, start doing health and medicine and e-commerce in their languages, not just in English, because the internet was not designed just to be English. And to me, that opportunity is the opportunity for India, and it's a global opportunity as well. And there's sort of a race now in terms of scale. The Chinese internet is bigger than any of the other internets, and there's every reason to think that the Indian internet can become even larger just because of population growth and the math around young people here, because it's young people who tend to drive these adoptions.
Yeah, and to the point that you mentioned, I think the connectivity, at least plans are there, and hope both through.
The people are serious. I mean, the government leaders I have met are quite serious about making the internet happen here. And you have enough competition among the telecoms, even though they don't have enough capital. Plus, the demand is there. I mean, Indians want to communicate. They want to use smartphones. The prices are too high. The prices will come down with connectivity.
Yeah, we anticipate that maybe digital literacy may even precede literacy here, and I think that should be a big opportunity. Every time we talk about startups, the word Silicon Valley comes in, and
Sure.
you kind of lived through that. What does it take to create an Indian Valley, right? What is it? The business environment? Is it the culture? How crazy smart people can be encouraged. So what needs to be done to create a similar environment?
I think there's a good chance of doing it in India for a number of reasons. Let's imagine, one of the most interesting statistics about Silicon Valley is something like 40% of the startups are headed by Indian-born entrepreneurs. So we know that young Indian entrepreneurs have come to Silicon Valley, and they have the skills and the education which they got here. So we know the educational system here can produce such people. So where are they likely to be? They're likely to be in the top universities. And without prejudice, because I'm not an expert on your universities, I would say, for example, the IITs would all be good candidates for such places where these people would come out of. That's the first thing. The second thing that you need is you need money. And you don't need a lot of money, but you need a venture capital industry. And most investors are unwilling to take the risks in venture capital because most venture capital returns are poor. It's a hits business. And so you need to make sure you have venture capitalists who understand that it's a strategic investment, it's a portfolio investment, and so forth. The third, and this is important, is that there's a set of things that the government needs to make sure are fixed in the law. An example from the web is what is called intermediary liability. And if the intermediaries are liable for the acts of the users, then the startup itself can't get there. I'll give you an example from Britain. It turns out that there was a series of British copyright laws which have since been changed, by the way, which if Google had been started in Britain would have ruled Google illegal. So you wonder, why was Google not founded in Britain? Well, that's certainly one of them, okay? So what I would do, and I would encourage the government, because the government has an innovation agenda, is look at every barrier to innovation and get rid of it. Now, why would there be barriers to innovation? Well, the incumbents want them, because the incumbents don't want competition. The last thing the incumbents want is some startup of young people coming out of one of the IITs screwing up their model, right? It's called creative destruction. And so the incumbents, and this is true in every country, fight hard for their privilege. So it's very important that the legal structure and the incentive structure reward innovation. Why does innovation matter? Why does what you do matter so much? Because this becomes the job engine. And ultimately, the question that I would ask is that all of this rising standards here in India, all these people join the internet, they're going to want higher paying jobs. And they're going to have the education to do it. Where are those jobs going to come from? They're going to come from innovation. They're going to come from new startups. Because the existing companies won't be big enough or capable of absorbing all those people.
Yeah. Technology continues to change, and we've seen it not in lifetimes, but very, very short periods. There was the internet, and then the content, the search, right? We're not talking about mobile analytics. What's the next big thing? What should we bet on? What should these young people look at investing on for tomorrow?
In the near term, the next big thing is mobile, which was the same thing last year and the year before. And please don't forget that the near-term next thing is mobile. I just told you the numbers. There'll be hundreds of millions of new mobile customers whose primary experience with the internet will be on a mobile phone. So what that means is mobile applications, I would recommend you use Android, right? But you can use the competitors as well, but Android is going to be the majority of the market, thank goodness. Android, by the way, is free, open, scalable, long list, right? So I clearly have a strong opinion, but you can make a mistake and use somebody else's. So I want to emphasize mobile. If you're not building mobile apps to your solution, you're not doing the right thing. Then the next thing that will happen is these large data centers, the sort of data analytics, will begin to be important. I would bet that every business in India could become more efficient and more profitable by relatively straightforward data analytics involving customer behavior, distribution, logistics, planning, and so forth. It's been true in Europe and the United States. I'm sure it's true here. Huge fortunes to be made there. Again, these are relatively low-risk answers. The more speculative things have to do with what happens when you have much better artificial intelligence and when the next generation of technology can do automatic translation, can do speech to text, can listen in and help you and become an advisor. So for me, here I am in India. I was here once before. I would love it if my computer said, by the way, Eric, this is where you stayed, this is who you met, this is what you said, this is where you were wrong, right? I would love an assistant to give me that advice. It's perfectly possible if I asked that a Google in the future could do this sort of information to help me get through my trip and become even more effective in what I do.
Thanks. I'm going to invite some of our young startups to ask questions. In fact, many of my questions were also pulled. But I just want to ask one last one.
Sure.
Have you broken the code of what makes thing viral on YouTube?
We need to ask Mr.
And
Sai
more
Park.
importantly, I wanted to check with you, what makes Gangnam and Harlem dance and movement happen?
I
it.
cannot tell you about the Harlem Dance one at all. That one makes no sense to me. I will tell you about Sai Park, that he is a creative genius, and there we go.
There you go.
And if you get a chance to hang out with him, he's pretty clever. What I do know is that there will be another one, and another one, and another one. Because these networks create opportunities for new creative thought, things which you would never imagine to take over. So I'm sure that Mr. Park will try very hard to have another one, like Gangnam Style, but I'm sure his competitors will also innovate. And I think that's great. The world is a very big place. Don't ever forget this. Mr. Park's video has been seen more than 1 billion times. I think it's 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion now. Who would have thought that he could have that kind of reach? Think about the scale of Bollywood, right? The Indian media industry. How many such talent and acts could become global and viral now with this new tool? And by the way, YouTube is doing incredibly well in India. even with terrible bandwidth. Can you imagine how well YouTube would do with the kind of bandwidth that's going to be happening in the next few years? With real fiber optic networks and real access, it's going to be phenomenal.
So Eric, what we did is, in anticipation of your coming here, we put a competition and asked people to ask you questions.
Okay.
And we were flooded with them. We got hundreds of them with us. But we do have 4 young startups. I don't know whether to call them startups. I was chatting with them. They're all successful, right? And they're.
I think relative to you and I, everyone's young.
Yes. so could I request our CEOs from EasyTabs, Mobstack, Practo, and Skill and Kindle to come and join us here. And what I'm going to do is ask my colleagues to share with your office all the questions you get. I think that will be a great list of FAQs that your people can prepare you.